Hi all, I have an absolutely fabulous game to show you. Fabulous. Yes, I'm using a different word. This is, Lewis recommended this on the Leela Chess forums. Trifon, I just saw this spectacular game by Enrico Caruso against Stockfish 9 in the Fred Test of the Nets. And he mentions a number of amazing features of this game, but I don't want to tell you them in advance. We can talk about them after. So let's have a look at this game against Stockfish 9. This is... the code is LC0 Windows CUDA.17 for the version of Leela, whatever that is. So D4 from this version of Leela. Stockfish 9 plays knight F6. I'll find out time limits, put them in the pinned comments of this video eventually. C4 E6. Anyway, the opening book given is the Nimzo engine Saemich variation with A3. And in fact, some of you may remember I played quite a number of blitz games on the ICC with this variation, prompting to get that dark square bishop. And I was aware of a way of gambiting c4 actually in some of those games, and had some great successes here in this variation. Because it seems that black, after taking, although some structural damage is incurred, white does have this potentially very dangerous dark square bishop to be celebrated. So this is the end of the book. Rook e8. We have knight e2 here, actually. Knight e2. Very interesting. Because you might think the natural move bishop d3, but this might make e5 more effective somehow for e4. But actually knight e2 first. e5 is played here. And now f3. So already there's an element of mysteriousness around this position in a way. Not touching the bishop, just moving the knight. So we have knight c6, knight g3, b6, and it's now that e4 is played. Knight a5, bishop d3, and bishop a6. And here it's a nuisance. This is the structural exploitable weakness, it seems. And if we try and casually protect this, then it does run into things like knight b3 potentially, hitting rook and bishop, and maybe taking away our treasured trump card of this position is that dark square bishop without the counterpart. That's what makes this bishop so exciting. There's no counterpart. So it's like a mathematical equation not balanced, by black potentially in its own right. So white castles and uses this kind of gambit, which I have employed myself in blitz, and many other very strong players have demonstrated this kind of gambit to be really dangerous because of this, dangerous dark square bishop. Now in this position, by the way, knight takes c4. Probably the most accurate move is queen a4, hitting both pieces. For example, knight e3 is tactical, but white wins two pieces for a rook, and this is very, very nice for white. Just for those interested, if queen e2, that does run into d5, and there's trouble at mill here. This is not worth the trouble. E takes hitting the queen. So the way to do it is queen a4. Okay, on knight takes c4. But bishop takes c4, much safer, is played. And then we have knight f5. And this is another perk. It's not just this bishop, it's this knight f5. And black plays a very forcing move, keeping control, it seems, of the position, and keeping white's excitement contained, because taking here does lure the queen away from b3. Very, very logical. And then knight b3 is possible, right? Just before we get into that, if the knight was kicked, check and bishop g5, and this bishop's great, and we've got things like f4 coming up. This type of scenario is just fantastic, as you might imagine. It's just absolutely wonderful stuff. Here there's f6 check, or taking the rook. Here there's just crashing through like this. Devastation ensues. So as you could expect. Now on d5 here, bishop g5, again, this type of story, just to get a flavour of the position, it's in white's favour because the knight actually holds d4 here. There's no major disaster with the centre, and just in time, the bishop now uncovers protection of the queen on d4. So there's, again, d4 is solid. White's got the bishop pair. This is a nasty pin. That's kind of winning for white. And also, let's check out knight b3. Sort of, this just allows, again, a two-piece scenario. This knight's not going anywhere. So 2 pieces for the rook will be absolutely great for white. Great news. So the great news bears are kept away, surely, because Stockfish 9, which many people worship, played this, and then knight b3, getting rid of the fun of the possession. Cold shower, get rid of the trump card. Everything's going to be accounted for after this. There's going to be no major imbalances. Right. We have to move the rook, don't we? What would you play in this position if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video? Bishop g5. Isn't there a slight snag here? Well, actually, okay, knight takes a1 is played. You might think, okay, it's just an exchange sack here, because we can actually just recapture and have the dark square bishop. Okay, you could look at it like that. Yeah. Yeah, if rook a2, just to show, getting rid of that dark square bishop, d5. Black's actually doing quite well here. The centre's fragile. Black's pieces are doing are well placed. So bishop g5, so offering the rook. Now here, if the rook isn't taken, there's never any g5 because of knight takes h6 and taking here, and it's just a lot of fun to be had there. Devastation, for example, devastation scenarios, as you'd expect. So knight takes. We have now, what do we have? Do we have rook takes or something else? So a whole rook's being taken. Do we recapture? Or something else? In fact, Leela plays f4. Funny enough, f4. Because maybe black's up to no good in the centre of taking. It takes the rook away from the f file as well. So this is really a stunner, because now it is like a temporary rook sacrifice, letting the knight, run away now. So very, very interesting concept. An entire rook sack. Now, not just an exchange sack intent. The rook is left on f1. Why bother going there and having to come back? What a load of hassle. Just sack the rook instead. Leave the rook on f1 by default. It's the default rook on castling being used. We've got the trump card bishop, which should cause some magic in the possession. There's no counterpart. Now, if e takes f4, e5, this situation is really dangerous because the queen and knight are threatening to mate. The knight's also not just supporting queen g7, it's stopping an escape route of the king. So this kind of scenario is just leading to a checkmate, for example. And here on f4, instead of knight b3 again, let's have a quick look. Knight b3 was played, but let's have a look at e takes e5. This scenario is also pretty unpleasant. That knight could actually be snapped up with advantage here. It's a bishop and knight for rook at least, but in fact there's also some fun lines like this: check, check, and mating. There's some fun stuff behind the scenes here. So knight b3, we're talking an entire rook sack now. The stakes have been raised. Is this bishop worth it? Is this celebrating a little bit too hard the dark square bishop without the counterpart, or is this really justified? Okay, we have bang, knight takes g7. So piercing some dark squares for the dark square bishop to work with. Even more readily exploitable. King takes is played. There's no real options here. If rook e6, we can snap that rook off and then take here. Nothing for black to do there. If rook e7, we just take there. Thanks very much. If rook f8, we just take here. Thanks very much. And we're winning the queen. So there's not too many options. I hope you'll agree. So I feel like I'm presenting a magic trick here because of this look, no rook. It's like a magic trick, just stepping you through this situation. So, but white's winning now. White's also invested a knight. So we're talking rook and knight down, correct? Let's verify it. Rook and knight over here. And we've got rook, bishop, queen. So it is a rook and knight down, but white's going to get a piece back. So maybe not so bad. Rook e6. But here is where it gets really quite magical in this position already. It's intriguing, to say the least. What does white actually do? A rook and knight down here. Now, as humans, we might be thinking, training from our early days, that we like to recapture things in general. And when we're two pieces down, we at least try and get back one of the pieces. That might feel like the natural instinct. But actually, there is an element of pin immobility here. And pins can be celebrated in a longer term aspect as well as a short term aspect. Celebrating the pin by getting a piece back is not entirely that great after queen g8. This might only be enough for drawing this line, for example, like this. Check, and getting the queens off. There's perpetual here. There are some fascinating lines here. So let's have a look at this again, this line. And on queen g4, if we tried for more, so say rook f3, okay, now let's try for more. Instead of allowing the check, let's do h3 here. And look at this situation. The unfortunate thing is that it's really interrupted by knight c1, the pesky knight c1. So this, bang, queen takes g3 in fact. So there's ways and means for black to be fine there, it seems. If we use our natural instinct to get back a piece, it does seem to backfire. E takes just doesn't seem enough to win. And in fact, again, this is again against nature. Sometimes backward moves we overlook. And I remember a backward queen move to d8 being celebrated quite heavily in the annotations of game once of Alexander Alekhine. But here, Leela plays queen d1, backward queen retreat. And it's very flexible. In some lines it might actually take the knight, but by going back to d1, this whole diagonal is a diagonal of opportunity. We have the knight being left to scurry back after its ill-gotten gains here. So what's happening here? Why is this making the position special? Let's look at queen g8 again. Now queen takes b3 just loses here because of knight takes e4, because black actually with queen g8 is unpinned, not just for the g file. This is just losing. White's losing that. So if queen g8 happens, that knight has to be taken. And if we have this scenario, we can actually take that knight and beat the exchange down. And it's actually this diagonal which is really dangerous here. And in fact, there's some a very nifty move here to provoke even more fracturing of the dot squares to defend against queen takes d7, because then check. And this could be a very, very nasty situation indeed, where both rooks are kind of executed one after the other on dart squares. Which is funny, because white doesn't even have the dart square bishop anymore. It's just this other diagonal of dart square disaster opens up. So anyway, knight a5, the knight scurries back. So white is still like a rook down and goes to install basically a fawn pawn. Bishop takes is either winning the queen or installing a fawn pawn. Black prefers to let the white install the fawn pawn. Now, fawn pawns, why are they so good? Here's another lesson in fawn pawns. Isolated queen pawns are a structural weakness that we know about, and one of the upsides of not having the isolated queen pawn is that it supports outposts. Say there's a pawn on d5, it supports e4 and c4 outposts, and often the rooks and bishops are quite active. So its structure isn't everything. That's what the isolated queen pawn says. The f6 pawn has hooks on e7 and g7. Now it so happens here that the g7 hook is very important to the rook. If we play queen g4, then queen g8, and so what? Black says, I'm a piece up. I'm a knight up. Again, queen h5. Again, there's no real time to do anything because there's always queen g8. Knight up. What's the big deal? There's a move here which, if we work backwards from the peg squares, maybe we just have to learn the patterns here around the form pawn, but it's the peg squares to celebrate. There's a move which is played here by Leela, which is super cool and doesn't interrupt the queen either. Actually, it's in that subset of possible moves that make use of the peg square g7 and doesn't interrupt the queen. So it's rook f4, actually. And it can repulse queen g8. That's another great feature of rook f4 here. So if queen g8, there's rook g4 hitting the queen, and then the peg square is used. This would be great, this position, because bang, we're threatening mates, and if black has to give up the queen, then all bets are off here. White's winning this with the queen against rook and knight. The pawns are pretty good as well. So that shows rook f4 is a fantastic, super strong move here. Yeah, it's even stronger than rook f3, I believe, because it doesn't interfere with the queen, coming to h5. So it can evict, serve an eviction note to queen g8 with rook g4. If we just have a look at this again and say queen d8, then okay, f6 is attack. We protect our form pawn, and then just go in for the kill with rook g7 again. So there's no real time to get away from queen h5. There might be a few nuisance checks there, but in fact, I haven't. This wasn't in the notes, but I think we can just sack the rook here because the form pawn would win. No, it doesn't. It doesn't because there's queen f8. Scrap that. But I think it's too risky to take over here in principle. I think h3 and queen h5. Okay, if you have any points about queen takes a3, just let me know there, some concrete variations, and for everyone else in the comments of this video. I don't think black survives this. So anyway, it's a fascinating move to study rook f4 because we are material down here. Black actually tried knight c4, and we have queen h5. So again, queen g8, there's always rook g4 here, and if queen f8 here, it's very, very clear cut now with rook g7. This scenario is just queen d5, also false rook and knight is just scooping up, winning. And here, if knight d6, again, this scenario, we just kick the queen out, which is protecting h7. So we actually threaten mate to put the queen on g8. Then we kick the queen out because we're going to get our hook usage with tempo, and that's just winning again. That's absolutely winning. So this rook f4 is a remarkable move played. So we have knight c4. Let's go back to the game. Was played in response. Queen h5, knight e3. And now, leisurely, just rook f3 is played in this position. This does seem a very good move. Let's have a look here at what's happening. If rook h4 here, this position is tricky because it's not just defending h7. There's no rook g4 here because the knight's got g4 covered. It's threatening mate. So this might actually be much more tricky, but even this long variation, it ends up being better for white actually, even there. But no, rook f3 was used, not rook h4. Kick this knight back first. So if that knight's just driven away, then we can go back without nuisance because it's controlling the g4 square. So we can go back and threaten mate and then serve the eviction note and then use the hook and then, What does black do? So that's the key thing. So we have this nuisance knight e3, which actually basically makes queen g8 even more effective. So it's kicked back. This is the story so far now. Queen e8, just leaving the knight to be taken. White does take it. White does cash out here. Gets that pesky knight. So we're left with a form pawn. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a pawn up. Is this enough to win? Queen e6. We have queen d5, forking e6 and a8. Now, black played this. It's even worse to take here. This is even more pronounced, the advantage in the endgame, because of the infiltration, rook e7. This is just a big advantage for white. So we have actually rook g8, and Leela exchanges off the queen. She just goes for the endgame now. Thanks very much. And even simplifies the rooks off. Because otherwise, again, the hook is used, rook g7, if the rooks are going to avoid that exchange. And this king and pawn ending is simply winning here. This is a winning king and pawn ending. So let's play through. What happened? d5. King takes. So winning to venture with the king now, even offering f6. It's just a totally winning king and pawn ending. Basically, the power of Zugzwang will mean, yep, b6 can be taken. And after a5, that was it. Winning. Masterpiece. Leela celebrated the gambit that I was aware of, and many other people, in an absolutely superb way with a rook sacrifice, and didn't mind being a rook and knight down. The urge to get a piece back was resisted, and instead we get this backward retreat move. And then with the form pawn celebration was superb. The form pawn offering the hooks. That hook move, rook f4 for rook g4 to g7, to repulse any queen g8, to support queen h5 without interruption, for, you know, rook g4, rook g7, or rook h4, prompting queen g8 for rook g4, rook g7. Fantastic attacking mechanisms are going on in this game, worthy of study for any attacking player in this variation, I believe. Very, very instructive attacking and positional chess game, making fantastic use to unheard of levels of celebration of the trump card Dark Square Bishop out of the opening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as me. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.